Picture this. You are a hunter-gatherer 12,000 years ago. Your entire world is the immediate struggle for survival. You have no metal tools, no pottery, no wheel, and you haven't even domesticated plants or animals. Your people live in small nomadic bands. The very concept of a village, let alone a city, is thousands of years in the future. Now, with that image in your mind, organize tens of thousands of hours of labour. Quarry 50-ton pillars of solid limestone. Carve them with breathtakingly complex images of predators and abstract symbols. Then drag them for miles and erect them into massive, circular temples that realign humanity's place in the cosmos. It's impossible. It contradicts the entire story of human civilization we've been taught. Except that is exactly what happened. This isn't just a collection of ancient ruins. This is a complete rewriting of our origin story. Tonight, we are not just looking at old stones. We are travelling back to the very dawn of the modern human mind, to a time that should not have existed. We will journey to the arid highlands of southeastern Turkey, where a discovery was made that is so profound, so utterly world-changing, that academia is still struggling to comprehend its implications. We will begin at the site that broke the timeline, Göbekli Tepe. Then we will journey deeper into a vast and interconnected network of even older, stranger sites that are only now being unearthed, a web of megastructures known as Tas Tepele. Finally, we will confront the two great mysteries that define this lost world. What kind of people could have built this, and why, after 1,000 years of monumental effort, did they meticulously bury it all and walk away forever? This is the story of a forgotten chapter of humanity, a chapter that proves civilization did not begin with agriculture and settlement. It began with an idea. It began with a cathedral in the desert, built at the end of the last ice age. For most of history, the hill known as Göbekli Tepe, which translates to Potbelly Hill, was just that. A rounded, unremarkable feature in the Anatolian landscape. Local farmers occasionally found strange carved stones, but dismissed them as markers from a Byzantine cemetery. They were wrong. They were off by about 10,000 years. The hill wasn't natural at all. It was a man-made mound, an artificial tell, concealing a secret of staggering importance. It wasn't until 1994 that a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt, who had been working at a nearby Stone Age site, heard about these stones. He decided to visit the hill, and what he saw changed his life and our understanding of the past forever. He didn't just see fragments. He saw the tops of immense T-shaped pillars jutting from the earth. He recognized the flint chippings littering the ground, not as random debris, but as the waste products of a colossal Stone Age operation. Schmidt knew, with an intuition that only a seasoned archaeologist could possess, that he was standing on something that had no right to exist. He knew he could either walk away and let someone else deal with the paradigm-shattering implications, or he could spend the rest of his life digging there. He chose to dig. What he and his team uncovered was, and is, the oldest known temple complex in the world. Not by a little, by a mind-blowing margin. Göbekli Tepe is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It's 7,000 years older than the first pyramids of Giza. It was built in a period we call the pre-pottery Neolithic, a time when humanity was supposed to be living in simple, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. Yet here was proof of something else entirely. Here was coordinated, monumental architecture on an industrial scale. Geomagnetic surveys revealed the true extent of the site. Buried beneath the Potbelly Hill were at least 20 distinct circular enclosures, each one a stone temple. To date, only a handful have been excavated. The most famous are enclosures A, B, C, and D, and they are spectacular. Imagine circular rooms, up to 30 metres across, defined by rings of carved limestone pillars. These are not small stones. Many stand over 5 metres tall and weigh upwards of 10 tons. At the centre of each circle stand two even larger, monolithic T-shaped pillars, reaching towards the sky like silent, headless giants. The sheer logistics are almost impossible to comprehend. The limestone was quarried from pits hundreds of metres away. Using nothing but flint tools and stone hammers, these ancient people chipped away, freeing 50-ton blocks from the bedrock. How did they move them? We don't know. There was no wheel, no beasts of burden. It would have required hundreds of people working in perfect concert, using ropes and ramps and brute force to haul these behemoths into position. This implies a level of social organisation, of planning and shared purpose, that archaeologists had long believed was impossible for a pre-agricultural society. You need leaders, you need specialists, you need a way to feed and house this massive workforce. You need, in short, a society far more complex than the simple hunter-gatherer model allows. But it's the carvings that truly transport you into the mind of this lost world. The pillars are not blank. They're covered in a breathtaking menagerie of exquisitely carved reliefs. But these are not the animals they hunted for food. You don't see deer or gazelle. You see predators. You see venomous snakes coiling up the sides of the pillars. You see scorpions, spiders, and snarling wild boars. You see foxes leaping, and powerful aurochs, the wild ancestors of modern cattle, charging. And most ominously, you see vultures, birds associated across many cultures with death and the sky. These aren't just pictures of animals. This is a symbolic language. The T-shape of the pillars themselves is highly stylized, but clearly anthropomorphic. On the sides of some, you can see faint reliefs of arms and hands, their fingers pointing downwards, wrapping around the front of the pillar. They are wearing belts, decorated with symbols. These aren't just posts, they are beings. They are stylized representations of powerful human-like entities, gods, ancestors, or shamans, gathered in a circle. The smaller pillars are the attendees, and the two massive central pillars are the clear focal point. The two most important figures in this stone assembly. One of the most enigmatic carvings is on a pillar in enclosure D, now famously known as the vulture stone. It's a complex scene. It shows a large vulture, its wing outstretched, and below it, a headless human figure. Surrounding them are other symbols, including a scorpion. Some researchers, most notably Graham Hancock, have argued this is not just a scene of sky burial, where bodies were left for vultures to clean. They believe it is a star map. They contend that the animals represent constellations, the scorpion as Scorpius, for example, and that the entire panel is a date stamp marking a specific astronomical event. That event, a cataclysmic comet impact known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, thought to have occurred around 10,950 BC, plunging the world back into a mini ice age. Is it possible that Göbekli Tepe was built by the survivors of this cataclysm, a memorial to a world-changing catastrophe written in stone and stars, a way of saying, "We will not forget"? The theory is controversial, but it highlights the profound mystery we are dealing with. These carvings are not simple decoration. They are a library of myths, a cosmic blueprint, a message from a world so ancient its consciousness is almost alien to us. The people who built this place were not just concerned with where their next meal was coming from. They were grappling with the biggest questions of all: life, death, and the cosmos. They were trying to make sense of their world and their place within it. The very existence of Göbekli Tepe flips the script of civilization on its head. The old story was simple. First came agriculture. The stability of a reliable food source allowed people to settle in one place, forming villages. This proximity and surplus of food and time then allowed for the development of complex religion, social hierarchies, and monumental architecture. The farm came first, then the temple. But Göbekli Tepe tells us the exact opposite may be true. Here, the temple came first. Klaus Schmidt famously theorized that it was the very process of building Göbekli Tepe that kick-started the agricultural revolution. The need to feed the hundreds, perhaps thousands, of workers who would have had to gather for months at a time would have placed an impossible strain on the local resources of wild game and plants. The easiest way to solve this problem would be to domesticate those plants and animals. The first evidence for domesticated wheat comes from a site just a few miles from Göbekli Tepe, at precisely the same time the temples were in use. It seems the immense effort of building a house for the gods forced humanity to invent a new way of life. The desire to connect with the cosmos created the civilization we know today. For years, Göbekli Tepe was viewed as a singular, miraculous anomaly, a flash of inexplicable genius in the dark of prehistory. It was the lone cathedral in a world of wilderness. This made it mysterious, but also containable. It was a freak event, a one-off. But what if it wasn't? What if it was just the first one we found? What if it was merely the tip of a mind-bogglingly vast and ancient iceberg? The latest discoveries in the region have turned that question into a terrifying certainty. Göbekli Tepe was not alone. In recent years, the Turkish government, in collaboration with archaeologists, has launched the Tas Tepeler project. Tas Tepeler means stone hills, and they have found them, dozens of them, using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging across a 100-kilometre radius around Göbekli Tepe. They have identified at least 12 other major hilltop sites from the same period, many containing the same signature T-shaped pillars. Some of them may even be older. This isn't the story of a single temple. This is the story of a lost civilization, a network of sacred sites that formed a vast ritual landscape. One of these sites, Karahan Tepe, is proving to be even more revealing, and in many ways even stranger than Göbekli Tepe. Located about 60 kilometres away, it sits on a rocky hillside, a place clearly chosen for its dramatic views and natural features. And while it shares the same DNA as its more famous cousin, the circular enclosures, the T-pillars, it has its own unique and deeply unsettling personality. If Göbekli Tepe was a temple for the animal gods, Karahan Tepe seems to be a place focused on something else. It is focused on humanity and the underworld. One of the first structures excavated at Karahan Tepe is staggering. It's a large rock-cut chamber, 10 metres deep, with a forest of over 250 pillars crammed inside. But these are not the massive T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Most are smaller, more slender, and distinctly phallic. This was clearly a place of fertility rituals, a concept largely absent from the symbolic world of Göbekli Tepe. The emphasis here is different, more primal, more connected to life, birth, and regeneration. But the most arresting discovery is a side chamber connected to this main hall. As excavators cleared the debris, they uncovered a line of 11 towering phallic pillars, and at the end of the line, carved directly from the bedrock of the chamber wall, was a human head. It has a powerful jaw, a prominent nose, and deep-set eyes that seem to stare out from the stone across eternity. It is a portrait of a specific individual, or a powerful being emerging from the underworld, from the very rock of the earth. The artistry is breathtaking, but the feeling it evokes is deeply eerie. Who was this being? An ancestor, a shaman, a god of the underworld? This human focus is everywhere at Karahan Tepe. While Göbekli Tepe is dominated by animals, Karahan Tepe is filled with human depictions. They found statues of men, often depicted carrying leopards, a powerful symbol of shamanic power or control over the forces of nature. They found disturbing sculptures, like a human figure with a bird's head, and a statue of a seated man, his ribs and spine clearly visible, as if he is emaciated or in a state of starvation, perhaps a depiction of a shaman undertaking a vision quest through fasting. The art here is more personal, more psychological. It's a journey into the human psyche, into the terrors and wonders of the Stone Age mind. Another recent find at a nearby site called Seibert takes this even further. A carved panel was found showing a man holding his own phallus, flanked by two leopards. This is not the abstract symbolic world of Göbekli Tepe. This is a narrative. This is a story being told in stone, a myth frozen in time. The consistency of the art style across these different sites, the specific way leopards are depicted, the posture of the human figures, proves that these were not isolated communities. They were part of a single shared culture, a shared belief system, a unified artistic tradition that lasted for over 1,000 years. They were in communication. They were working together. What does this mean? It means we are looking at the world's first truly regional culture, bound together not by kings or writing or agriculture, but by a shared religion and a shared cosmic vision. This was a holy land, a Stone Age Vatican city spread across an entire landscape, with each hill serving a different purpose, a different ritual function. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was the centre for celestial observation and rituals concerning the animal spirits. Perhaps Karahan Tepe was the centre for chthonic underworld rituals, focused on birth, death, and human ancestry. Together, they formed a complete cosmology, a map of the universe carved into the very earth. So who were these people? What can we possibly know about the minds that conceived of this? We have no writing, no pottery to analyse for clues about their diet or trade. All we have is the architecture and the art, and it tells us they were obsessed with a world just beyond our own. The sheer number of hybrid figures, part human, part animal, points towards a shamanic belief system. Shamans are individuals who can, through trance, ritual, or psychoactive substances, travel to the spirit world, interacting with animal spirits and ancestors to bring back healing or knowledge for the tribe. The temples of Tashtepela may have been the arenas for these journeys. The pillars may have been seen as portals, gateways to that other reality. The art suggests a deep duality in their worldview. There is a clear separation between the world of humans and the world of powerful, often terrifying, wild animals. The reliefs show a world teeming with potent, dangerous forces that need to be appeased, negotiated with, or perhaps controlled. The absence of many female figures is also striking. This seems to be a world dominated by male symbolism, by hunting, by predators, and by phallic power. Yet we cannot be sure. We are looking at this culture through a keyhole, seeing only their most sacred public art. Their daily life remains a complete mystery. Let's re-examine the vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe in this new, wider context. The idea of sky burial, where the dead are excarnated by vultures, gains incredible power. The vulture, in this view, is a psychopomp, a creature that carries the soul of the deceased from the earthly realm to the sky world. The headless figures depicted are not victims of violence, they are the blessed dead, undertaking their final journey. The entire complex of Göbekli Tepe could have been a sophisticated mortuary complex, a place where the dead were prepared for their journey into the afterlife. The pillars representing the ancestors would stand witness to this eternal cycle. This connects to a deeper, more profound idea. These people may have been ancestor worshippers. The T-pillars are not just gods, they are the founding ancestors of the different clans or tribes that gathered there. Each clan would have its own pillar, its own place in the sacred circle. Building these massive stone monuments was a way of honouring those who came before, of keeping their memory and their power alive. It was a social contract written in stone, binding the generations together. To gather at the temple was to gather in the presence of all your ancestors, a powerful unifying force for a scattered people. But this still doesn't explain the sheer astronomical complexity that seems to be woven into the fabric of these sites. The main enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are not randomly oriented. The two central pillars in enclosure D, for example, appear to be aligned to frame the rising of the star Sirius, which was a very important star for many ancient cultures, including the Egyptians, who used it to time the flooding of the Nile. Other alignments seem to point to the solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't just a temple, it was an observatory. These hunter-gatherers were mapping the heavens. They were tracking the slow, predictable cycles of the sun, moon and stars, and encoding that knowledge into their architecture. Why would a hunter-gatherer need such precise astronomical knowledge? For a farmer, it's obvious. You need to know when to plant and when to harvest. But for a hunter, perhaps it was for timing animal migrations, or for knowing when certain plants would be ripe for gathering, or perhaps it was for a more spiritual reason. Perhaps they believed the sky world was where the gods and ancestors lived, and by tracking the stars, they were tracking the movements and moods of these powerful beings. They saw the cosmos as a living entity, and their temples were machines for communicating with it, for harmonizing their lives on earth with the grand cycles of the heavens. This brings us to the final and perhaps most profound mystery of this lost world. After more than 1,000 years of continuous building, of quarrying and carving and hauling, a period of time longer than the entire history of the Roman Empire, they stopped. And they didn't just abandon their sacred sites, they did something utterly bizarre. They deliberately and carefully buried them. This was not an act of destruction, it was an act of preservation. Ton by ton, they filled their magnificent stone circles with earth, debris, animal bones, and broken tools, until the temples vanished, hidden within the gentle curves of the man-made hills we see today. Why? Why would a culture invest so much energy into creating something so magnificent only to entomb it? There are several competing theories, and each one opens up a fascinating window into their world. One possibility is that the religion itself changed. 1,000 years is a long time. Beliefs evolve. Perhaps a new prophet or a new ideology emerged that declared the old ways, the old gods, taboo. The burial would have been a way of decommissioning the temples, of putting their immense power to rest, sealing them away from the world of the living. It was a ritual closing of a world age. A new chapter was beginning, and the old one had to be put to sleep. Another theory ties back to the climate. The era of Göbekli Tepe, from roughly 9,600 BC to 8,200 BC, corresponds with the end of the Younger Dryas and the beginning of the warm, stable climate of the Holocene, the geological epoch we still live in today. Agriculture began to take hold. life was changing rapidly. Perhaps the old religion, with its focus on wild animals, hunting, and cosmic cataclysms, was no longer relevant to this new world of farming and settlement. Burying the temples was a way of burying the past, of severing ties with the terrifying and unpredictable world of the Ice Age, and embracing the new, more predictable world of agriculture. But there's a more poignant possibility. What if they buried the temples because their world was ending? What if the culture itself collapsed? The sheer effort of maintaining this ritual landscape, of feeding the workers, of organising these massive construction projects may have simply become unsustainable. Or perhaps disease or conflict tore them apart. In this view, the burial was a final desperate act. They were hiding their most sacred creations, preserving them for a future time, hoping that one day someone would return and reawaken them. They were creating a time capsule. Whatever the reason, the act of burial is what allowed these structures to survive for 11,000 years in such a pristine state. They were not eroded by wind and rain, not scavenged for building materials by later cultures. They were protected, sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for an archaeologist with a keen eye to recognise them for what they were. The people of Göbekli Tepe didn't just build the world's first temples, they also curated the world's oldest and most important archaeological site. So what is the ultimate legacy of Tas Tepela? It is a profound re-evaluation of what it means to be human. It tells us that our ancestors were not the grunting, primitive cavemen of popular imagination. They were us. They were people with minds as complex, as curious, and as spiritually hungry as our own. They were astronomers, engineers, artists, and theologians. They possessed a staggering intellectual and organisational capacity that we are only now beginning to appreciate. It proves that the human drive for meaning, the need to build something that connects us to a reality larger than ourselves, is not a byproduct of civilization. It may be the very engine that created it. Before we built cities for ourselves, we built massive ceremonial centres for our gods and our ancestors. The urge to gather, to share a common belief, and to participate in a grand, collaborative project is perhaps the most fundamental instinct of our species. It is what allowed us to move from small, scattered bands to the global civilization we have today. The hills of southeastern Turkey are still keeping most of their secrets. Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Most of the other dozen sites have barely been touched. What other wonders lie sleeping beneath the earth? What other stone circles? What other terrifying and beautiful carvings? What other clues to the consciousness of our most distant ancestors are waiting to be found? We are standing at the very beginning of this new chapter in human history. The story we thought we knew is incomplete. The first pages have been torn out, and we are only now finding them, scattered across the ancient landscape of Anatolia. These structures are not just archaeological curiosities, they are a mirror. In their silent stone faces, we see a reflection of the deepest parts of ourselves. The part that looks up at the stars and wonders, the part that feels a connection to those who came before, and the part that is driven to create something that will outlast our own fleeting lives. The people of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe have been silent for 10 millennia, but now their stones have begun to speak, and they're telling us that the story of humanity is far older, far stranger, and far more magnificent than we ever dared to imagine. Let's think about the nature of a mind that can conceive of such a thing. We are separated from them by a chasm of 11 millennia, a gap so vast that their daily thoughts and fears are almost alien to us. Yet in their art we find a bridge. Consider the T-pillars again. Why that shape? It is a masterful act of abstraction. They could have carved fully realistic human statues. They certainly had the skill, as the emerging head at Karahantepe proves. But they chose not to. They created a symbol. The T-shape is both human and not human. The horizontal bar is a head, but it is featureless, anonymous. The vertical shaft is a body, but it is unnaturally slender, ethereal. This wasn't a failure of artistry. It was a deliberate choice. By removing the individual details, the face, the expression, they created a representation of a concept. This isn't a statue of a specific ancestor, like a photograph. This is a statue of the idea of an ancestor, the Platonic form of a guardian spirit. Its facelessness is its power. It allowed every person from every clan who gathered there to see their own ancestor, their own connection to the divine, reflected in the stone. It is a level of symbolic thinking that is profoundly modern. Now, let's place ourselves inside one of these enclosures. Stand in the centre of enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe. The stone circle closes you off from the outside world. The only thing you see is the ring of silent, watching figures and the vast, open sky above. The acoustics of the space would have been extraordinary. Sound would bounce and reverberate off the massive pillars. Imagine the effect of a human voice chanting in that space. Imagine the rhythmic beat of a drum. The stones themselves would seem to come alive, to hum with energy. This is a field of study called archaeoacoustics, and it is revealing that many ancient sacred sites were built as engines of sensory experience. They were designed to alter consciousness. The low-frequency sounds of chanting or drumming can induce a trance-like state, a feeling of deep connection to something beyond the self. Was this the purpose of the enclosures? Were they sound chambers, designed to help the shamans travel to the spirit world, their journey powered by the resonant frequency of the temple itself? The pillars weren't just watching the ritual, they were participating in it, amplifying it, becoming part of the sacred technology. This sensory world extends beyond sound. Think of the light. At night, lit only by the flickering orange glow of torches, the carved animals would seem to move in the shadows. The snarling boar, the leaping fox, the coiled snakes, they would writhe and dance on the stone surfaces. The experience would have been immersive, terrifying, and completely transportive. You weren't just looking at a picture of the spirit world. For a few sacred moments, you were in it. You were standing in the assembly of the gods. And what of the rituals themselves? The art gives us tantalizing, if grisly, clues. We see the headless human figures. For a long time this was a puzzle, but when you look at other sites from the same period across the Near East, a pattern emerges. It's been called the Neolithic skull cult. At places like Jericho, archaeologists have found human skulls, detached from their bodies, that have been lovingly plastered with clay, their features recreated, and their eye sockets inlaid with seashells. These weren't the skulls of enemies. They were the skulls of revered ancestors. They were curated, cared for, and likely used in rituals. The head was seen as the seat of a person's identity, their life force. The body was just a vessel. What if the headless figures on the pillars at Göbekli Tepe are not depictions of victims, but of a sacred process? A body is offered to the vultures, as seen on the vulture stone, its flesh returning to nature. This act releases the spirit. The head, the essence of the individual, is then retrieved and brought into the home or a special shrine, where it becomes a direct link to the ancestral realm. The temples show us one half of the story, the body's journey. The other half, The journey of the skull was happening in the settlements that are only now being discovered. This completely changes how we view these people's relationship with death. It wasn't an ending, it was a transformation, a carefully managed process with multiple stages. Death was a gateway, and the vulture was the gatekeeper. The skull was the relic, the physical proof of continuity. It tells us they had a sophisticated, multi-layered conception of the soul, one that could be separated from the body and could continue to influence the world of the living. Let's journey back to Karahan-Tepe, to that unsettling rock-cut chamber. The focus on the underworld here is palpable. It is a space designed to be entered, a space that pulls you down into the earth. The very act of walking down into it would have been a ritual in itself. You leave the world of sunlight and sky behind and enter the domain of the chthonic, the subterranean. The forest of phallic pillars suggests a powerful life force, a creative energy that comes from deep within the earth. This wasn't a place of death but of regeneration. It was the womb of the world, and at the heart of it, that human head emerging from the stone. It is the focal point of the entire structure. What if this isn't just a carving? What if it marks the place where a real venerated skull was once interred? The stone head would be the permanent marker, the eternal guardian of the powerful relic hidden within the bedrock. The entire chamber then becomes a massive reliquary, a place to communicate with a founding ancestor of immense power, the one who emerged from the underworld to establish their people. Recent excavations at Karahan-Tepe have uncovered something else, something that deepens this connection to the subterranean world. Water. They have found evidence of channels carved into the bedrock, designed to route rainwater through the ritual spaces. Water, in this arid landscape, is life. Its presence in a sacred context is no accident. Imagine a ritual where water, the lifeblood of the earth, flows through the chamber of regeneration, washing over the pillars and pooling at the base of the ancestral head. This is a powerful fusion of symbols: water, stone, ancestor, and underworld. It speaks of a belief system centered on the cyclical nature of existence. Life emerges from the earth, is sustained by water, and eventually returns to the earth to be reborn again. This level of symbolic integration of architectural storytelling forces us to ask, how did they organize all this? We're not just talking about one project. We're talking about a dozen or more massive construction sites maintained over a millennium, spread across 100 kilometers. This requires more than just a charismatic leader. It requires a system. It requires a shared ideology so powerful that generations of people would dedicate their lives to it. Let's dismantle the old image of the starving hunter-gatherer. The region around Tas Tepela at the dawn of the Holocene was not a barren wasteland. It was a paradise. The highlands were covered in forests of pistachio and almond trees. The valleys teemed with herds of gazelle, wild sheep, and aurochs. The rivers were full of fish. These people were not struggling for survival. They were living in a world of abundance. This surplus is the key. It gave them the most valuable resource of all: time. Time to think, to dream, to wonder about the cosmos, and crucially, time to build. The construction probably happened in bursts. Perhaps for a few months every year, after the great gazelle hunts, different clans and tribes would converge on these sacred hills. These were not just work sites, they were festivals. They were massive social gatherings. People would exchange goods, arrange marriages, share myths, and reconnect with their wider community. The act of building was the glue that held their society together. Hauling a 50-ton pillar with 300 other people is a powerful team-building exercise. It forges bonds of trust and shared identity that are unbreakable. The temples built the society, just as the society built the temples. And who were the architects? Who held the blueprint in their minds? There must have been a priestly class, a group of specialists who held the sacred knowledge. These would have been the shamans, the astronomers, the keepers of the myths. They understood the celestial alignments. They directed the rituals, and they designed the enclosures. This knowledge was likely a closely guarded secret, passed down from master to apprentice over countless generations. We can imagine them observing the stars from these hilltops, year after year, slowly building a map of the heavens, a cosmic clock to regulate their earthly lives. They were the world's first intellectual elite, their power based not on wealth or warfare, but on knowledge. Their understanding of geometry was clearly advanced. You cannot create such perfect circles and precisely spaced pillars without a system of measurement and a deep intuitive grasp of spatial relationships. They were using ropes to create compasses. They were using sighting stones to mark astronomical alignments. They were, in essence, practicing a form of sacred geometry, believing that certain shapes and proportions held a divine power, that by recreating the harmony of the cosmos on Earth, they could influence it. This brings us to a more speculative but deeply compelling idea. Could this explosion of knowledge and monumental construction have been triggered by something? We come back to the Younger Dryas, that period of savage climate chaos that preceded the birth of Göbekli Tepe. The world experienced extreme cooling, rising sea levels, and mass extinctions. For the people who lived through it, it must have seemed like the end of the world. The myths of a great flood, which appear in cultures all over the globe, may be a distant memory of this very real trauma. What if the Tas Tepela civilization was founded by the survivors, people who had witnessed the heavens fall and the world torn apart? Such a cataclysm would have seared itself into their collective memory. Their primary motivation would have been to prevent it from ever happening again. Their new religion and their new temples would have been an attempt to restore balance to the cosmos, to appease the angry sky gods, and to create a system of celestial observation to watch for any signs of future disaster. The vulture stone, in this light, is not just a memorial, it's a warning, a message to future generations written in a symbolic language of constellations, saying, "This happened once, it can happen again. Watch the skies." This theory would explain the sudden appearance of this incredibly advanced culture. They were not inventing everything from scratch. They were carrying the embers of a pre-cataclysmic knowledge system. It would explain their obsession with astronomy and their almost desperate need to build on such a monumental scale. It was an act of civilizational scale therapy, an attempt to heal a deep collective trauma by creating order out of chaos. They were building a bulwark against the apocalypse. Let's get our hands dirty for a moment and consider the tools. To carve a single pillar with the intricate reliefs we see would have taken months, perhaps years. The only tools they had were made of flint, a hard, brittle stone. They would have needed a constant supply of newly knapped razor-sharp flint blades and points. The ground around the sites is littered with millions of these artifacts. It was an industrial-scale operation. Imagine the sound. Not just the rhythmic drumming of the rituals, but the constant, high-pitched chink, chink, chink of stone on stone. The sound of thousands of hours of patient, focused labour. The dust would have been constant, filling the air, coating the workers. The physical toll would have been immense. This was not easy work. It was a sacrifice, an offering of sweat and toil to the gods. Every single carving, every perfectly flattened surface is a testament to an almost superhuman level of dedication. They were not building for themselves. They were building for eternity. And they were not just carving animals. Alongside the predators and the vultures, we find abstract symbols, H shapes, crescents, discs, and strange belt-like patterns. This is a true script, not an alphabet, but a system of ideograms, where each symbol represents a complex idea. We cannot read it yet, but it is there. The pillars are not just art, they are texts. They are pages in a stone library, and the Tas Tepela landscape is the entire collection. Unlocking this symbolic language is the next great challenge for archaeologists. If we can crack this code, we will be able to read the minds of our ancestors directly, to hear their myths and prayers whispered to us across 11,000 years. The sheer variety across the different sites is also revealing. We've talked about the contrast between Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, but it's even more nuanced than that. Other sites are yielding different kinds of structures, different artistic focuses. One site, Sefer Tepe, seems to have been built much later, right at the end of the culture's lifespan. The pillars there are smaller, and the enclosures are rectangular, not circular. This shows a culture in transition, a belief system that was evolving right up until the very end. It wasn't static, it was a living, breathing tradition that grew and changed over 30 generations. This interconnected network of sites functioned like a planetary nervous system for their culture. Each site was a ganglion, a node of specialized activity, and pathways of pilgrimage and communication were the nerves that connected them all. Some sites may have been for initiation rituals for the young, others for funerary rites, some for astronomical observation, and others for celebrating the harvest of wild grains. People would have moved through this sacred landscape over the course of their lives, participating in different rituals at different sites, their journey through the world, mirroring their journey through the cosmos. It was a complete, perfectly integrated worldview, made manifest in stone and earth, and then they buried it. The decision to entomb their entire sacred world is perhaps the most human and poignant part of this entire story. The theory of a changing religion or a changing climate makes logical sense, but it feels cold. Think about it from their perspective. For 1,000 years, your people, your ancestors, your entire reason for being has been centered on these hills, and now you have to put it all to sleep. The act of filling in those enclosures must have been profoundly emotional. Every basket of dirt they threw in was a farewell. They were burying their gods. They were burying their ancestors. They were burying their history. Perhaps it was an act of profound respect. They believed the power in these places was so immense that it could not simply be abandoned. It had to be carefully, ritually returned to the earth from which it came. They were closing a portal that had been open for a millennium. It was the end of an age, and they knew it. They performed one final colossal ritual, not of creation, but of closure, a funeral for their entire universe. The legacy they left is not just in the stones they carved, but in the ideas they unleashed. The very act of coming together to build something permanent and sacred changed us forever. It taught us how to cooperate on a mass scale. It taught us how to plan for the future. It laid the social and psychological groundwork for everything that followed. Villages, cities, writing, kingdoms. Göbekli Tepe didn't just precede the agricultural revolution. It may have been the necessary catalyst for the revolution in human consciousness that made everything else possible. We are the descendants of the people who chose the temple over the hut. We have inherited their drive to find meaning, to build things that are greater than ourselves, to look at the vast, terrifying, beautiful universe and try to find our place within it. The silence of Tas Tepela is a challenge. It asks us to reconsider the very nature of progress, to question the story we tell ourselves about our own origins. It reminds us that there are entire chapters of the human story that have been lost and that our world is built on the foundations of forgotten wonders. The potbelly hills of Anatolia were not the beginning of civilization, but perhaps the magnificent, mysterious end of a chapter we never knew existed. A world of hunter-gatherer kings and shaman astronomers whose secrets we are only just beginning to exhume from the deep earth. The world they carved into the pillars is a world of tension, of power, and of exclusively male, wild energy. But what is truly staggering is not what they carved, but what they deliberately left out. In the thousands of reliefs discovered so far across the entire Tastipala network, we see a universe of predators, of venomous things, of celestial symbols and abstract geometry. What you do not see is almost everything else. You do not see a single depiction of a plant, not a tree, not a flower, not an ear of wheat. This is stunning, because these were people whose lives were intimately woven into the plant world, people on the cusp of domesticating the very grains that would change the world. Yet in their most sacred spaces, that entire kingdom of life is completely absent. You also do not see domesticity. There are no scenes of a camp or a settlement. There are no children, and most profoundly, there are almost no women. The few potential female depictions are highly abstract or ambiguous. This was not a space that reflected the totality of their lives. It was a curated reality, a space set apart, a theological statement. This was the world of the hunt, the world of the spirit quest, the world of the sky, and the world of the underworld. It was a man's world, or more accurately, it was a shaman's world. The daily cyclical, life-giving reality of the feminine, of agriculture, of home and hearth was intentionally excluded from these sacred arenas. This tells us that these were not community centres. They were places you went to leave the mundane world behind and enter a different, more dangerous and more powerful reality. To enter an enclosure at Göbekli Tepe was to enter a mythological landscape, a library of cosmic forces. Let's look closer at the key actors in this stone drama. The snake is everywhere. They are the most commonly depicted animal. They coil up the pillars, they slither across the stone. In countless cultures, the snake is a deeply powerful, dualistic symbol. It is a creature of the underworld, emerging from cracks in the earth. Its venom can bring death, but its shedding of skin is a symbol of rebirth and regeneration. It represents hidden knowledge, the secret wisdom of the earth. The sheer number of snakes tells us that these people were deeply concerned with the cycle of life and death, and the secret knowledge needed to navigate it. Then you have the fox, a creature that is neither fully of the day nor of the night. It is a trickster, a liminal being that moves on the borders. Foxes are clever, adaptable, and silent. In shamanic traditions, the trickster is not an evil figure, it is a vital one. The trickster is the one who challenges boundaries, who breaks taboos, and who, through its cleverness, often brings new knowledge or technology to humanity. The prevalence of the fox suggests these people had a sophisticated understanding of the world, one that included a place for ambiguity, for cunning, and for sacred clowns who operate outside the normal rules of society. And the wild boar. Not the domestic pig, but a terrifying, powerful beast with tusks like knives. The boar represents pure, untamed natural force. It is aggression, fury, and raw vitality. To confront a boar is to confront nature at its most dangerous. Carving the boar onto a sacred pillar was a way of acknowledging that power, of trying to understand it, and perhaps even of absorbing some of its ferocious energy. It's a symbol of the raw, chaotic power that existed just beyond the circle of the firelight, a power that had to be respected. When you see these animals not as a random collection, but as a symbolic system, a kind of periodic table of cosmic forces, the purpose of the temples becomes clearer. This was a place to mediate the relationship between humanity and the potent, non-human world. The pillars, the anthropomorphic T-shapes, stand in the middle of this menagerie of forces. They are humanity, or the ancestors, positioned at the center of the universe, surrounded by the spirits of nature. The temples were machines for maintaining balance, for ensuring that the terrifying power of the wild world and the secret knowledge of the underworld could be safely engaged with, without destroying the fragile order of human society. For a century, we've tried to understand these people by studying their broken tools and the bones they left behind. Now, we can do something that would have seemed like magic to early archaeologists. We can read the story in their very DNA. Genetic studies of skeletal remains from the pre-pottery Neolithic in Anatolia have given us a ghostly portrait of the temple builders themselves. And the story their genes tell is fascinating. They were a remarkably stable and continuous population. We see no evidence of mass migration into this area, no sign of a foreign elite arriving and suddenly directing the construction of temples. These people were the direct descendants of the Ice Age hunter-gatherers, who had lived in this region for thousands of years. The genius that erupted at Göbekli Tepe was homegrown. But what is truly mind-blowing is their genetic legacy. These Anatolian hunter-gatherers, the people who conceived of the T-pillars and the stone circles, were the very same population that 1,000 years later would begin to move out of Anatolia, spreading the secrets of agriculture into Europe. They were the ancestors. The so-called first European farmers who replaced the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers of Europe carried the DNA of the people of Göbekli Tepe with them. What does this mean? It means that the people who dreamed up this vast ritual landscape did not just vanish. Their bloodline flows in the veins of tens of millions of people living today. It also suggests that the agricultural revolution was not a separate event. It was the second act of a play that began in the temples. The same people, the same culture, first underwent a religious and cognitive revolution, and then they underwent a technological one. The social organization, the ability to plan for the future, the symbolic thinking that was forged in the great work of building the temples, were the essential pre-adaptations needed for the immense challenge of domesticating the planet. Let's return to the landscape itself. The placement of these sites feels intentional, even strategic. Why these specific hills? It wasn't just about finding a good view. It was about the very bones of the earth. The entire region is a limestone plateau. This material is relatively soft and easy to carve when first quarried, but it hardens over time when exposed to air, making it durable. The builders were expert geologists. They knew exactly where to find the best quality limestone, the flawless seams from which they could quarry a 50-ton monolith without it cracking. The stone was not just a building material, it was the sacred medium, the very substance of their world, and they knew how to read it. But there's more. Look at a map of the main Tastapela sites. They seem to form a network, with Göbekli Tepe near the centre. Is it possible they could see each other? On a clear day, from the summit of Göbekli Tepe, you can see for miles in every direction. It's conceivable that a smoke signal or a great bonfire lit at one site could have been seen by observers at another. Imagine a ritual timed to the winter solstice. As the sun sets on the shortest day of the year, a fire is lit at Karahan Tepe. Minutes later, the watchers at Göbekli Tepe see it and light their own, which is then seen by another site further north. A wave of fire and light, a signal of shared ritual, ripples across the entire sacred landscape, binding the scattered communities together in a single moment of cosmic observance. The network was not just conceptual, it may have been literal, a living system of communication written in fire against the night sky. And we must consider what lies beneath the ground. At Karahan Tepe, we have the tantalizing evidence of water channels. This relationship with subterranean water might be a key to understanding the entire cosmology. In many cultures, springs and wells are seen as portals, places where the underworld touches our own. They are places of healing, of prophecy, of birth. The word for the underworld in many mythologies is connected to water. Perhaps the sites were chosen not just for their view of the sky, but for their connection to the hidden waters below. The shamans would descend into the rock-cut chambers, not just to be in the earth, but to be near the source, the life-giving waters that flowed from the world of the ancestors. The entire religion may have been a sophisticated balancing act between the sky world, observed from the hilltops, and the water world, accessed through the chambers cut deep into the rock. As we decipher more of this lost world, we begin to see faint, ghostly echoes of its ideas in the great civilizations that followed. The story did not end when the temples were buried. It went underground, its themes and symbols resurfacing thousands of years later, transformed but recognizable. Consider the central T-pillar form. It's an abstract representation of a powerful, non-human being. Thousands of years later, in the same region of Anatolia, the Hittites would carve images of their gods. They were often shown standing on the backs of animals, like leopards or lions, a clear echo of the sculptures at Karahan Tepe. They were depicted not as simple humans, but as stylized, powerful beings, masters of the natural world. Is it a coincidence, or is it a thread of tradition passed down through countless generations? Think of the master of animals motif, the human figure calmly dominating two powerful predators. We see it at Cybers. We see it again, 5,000 years later, in Mesopotamian art, where the hero Gilgamesh is shown wrestling with lions. We see it in the iconography of the Minoan civilization on Crete. This archetype of humanity's sacred power over the chaotic forces of nature seems to have been born, or at least first immortalized in stone, in the temples of Tas Tepela. It's one of the foundational stories of civilization, and its first draft was written in a time before cities, before writing, before kings. Even the specific combination of animals seems to have had a long life, the vulture and the snake. In ancient Egypt, these two animals were the symbols of the unification of the kingdom. The vulture goddess Nekhbet represented Upper Egypt, and the cobra goddess Wadjet represented Lower Egypt. Together, they symbolized the sacred balance of the entire land. Is it possible that this symbolic pairing, the creature of the sky and the creature of the earth, had its origins 10,000 years ago in a hunter-gatherer temple in Anatolia? We can't prove it, but it feels like more than just a coincidence. It feels like we are seeing the headwaters of the great river of myth that watered all the civilizations of the ancient Near East. What we are witnessing is the birth of a new kind of human mind. This was not just a social revolution, it was a cognitive one. Before Göbekli Tepe, memory and myth were ephemeral. They existed only in the spoken word, in the dance, in the story told around the fire. They were fluid, changing with every telling. The construction of these massive permanent temples was a revolution in data storage. For the first time, humanity could externalize its collective memory, its cosmic map, into a physical structure that would not change. It was a way of making an idea permanent. The pillars were a library. The reliefs were the text. The alignments were the clock. The entire complex was a cultural hard drive, a repository of the most important knowledge their society possessed. By building it, they were ensuring that their worldview, their understanding of the cosmos, could be passed down intact from one generation to the next. This act of creating permanent, externalized meaning is the single most important step towards what we call civilization. It creates a stable foundation of shared belief upon which everything else can be built. Before you can invent writing to record your history, you must first have the idea that history is something worth recording. That idea was born here, in these stone circles. This fundamentally changes our view of technological progress. We tend to see it as a linear process, from simple to complex. But the story of Tastepala is not simple. These people possessed a staggering level of sociological and astronomical sophistication, yet their toolkit was incredibly basic. They had Stone Age technology, but they had an Information Age mindset. They were using flint and muscle to tackle problems of cosmology, eternity, and social cohesion. It proves that the most powerful tool we have ever possessed is not our hands, but our minds. The ability to create a shared myth, a collective story that binds thousands of people together in a common purpose, is a force more powerful than any bronze sword or steam engine. And this shared project had to be managed. The logistics we discussed earlier, quarrying, moving, carving, feeding, didn't just happen. They required a new kind of social technology. They required managers, foremen, quartermasters, architects. We can speculate that the society was organised into different clans or guilds, each with a specific responsibility. Perhaps one clan were the quarry masters, who knew the secrets of the stone. Another were the master carvers, the artists. Another were the hunters, tasked with providing the massive amounts of food required. And at the top, the shaman astronomers, the keepers of the sacred blueprint. These roles would not have been based on wealth. They would have been based on skill and sacred knowledge. This was likely a meritocracy of the spirit. The most respected individuals were not the strongest hunters, but the ones who could best navigate the spirit world, who understood the movements of the stars, who could direct the rituals that maintained cosmic balance. This is a form of social organisation that is completely alien to our modern world, one based not on the accumulation of material goods, but on the accumulation of wisdom and spiritual power. It was a civilization of the mind. The emotional world of these people is almost impossible to touch, yet we can feel it in the stone. The art is not passive or decorative. It is charged with energy. The animals are not depicted at rest. They are shown in motion, in moments of intense action. The boar is charging, the fox is leaping, the snakes are writhing. The headless man on the vulture stone is not lying down. He is in a strange seated posture, almost as if he is still alive, still participating. This is a world of dynamism, of tension, of potent forces held in a delicate, momentary balance. It speaks of a worldview that saw the universe as a living, breathing entity, not as a static collection of objects. The cosmos was a great drama, and humanity was both an actor and the audience. The temples were the stage where this drama was performed, a place where humans could actively participate in the great cosmic cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Their religion was not one of quiet, passive worship. It was one of active, energetic, and probably dangerous participation. To be a shaman was not an easy life. The art, with its depictions of emaciated figures, suggests that vision quests involved intense physical ordeals, fasting, isolation, perhaps even the use of hallucinogenic plants. They were pushing the very limits of human consciousness to break through to the other side. Recent excavations at Karahantepe have uncovered something else, something that deepens this connection to the subterranean world: water. They have found evidence of channels carved into the bedrock, designed to route rainwater through the ritual spaces. Water in this arid landscape is life. Its presence in a sacred context is no accident. Imagine a ritual where water, the lifeblood of the earth, flows through the chamber of regeneration, washing over the pillars and pooling at the base of the ancestral head. This is a powerful fusion of symbols: water, stone, ancestor, and underworld. It speaks of a belief system centered on the cyclical nature of existence. Life emerges from the earth, is sustained by water, and eventually returns to the earth, to be reborn again. This level of symbolic integration, of architectural storytelling, forces us to ask, how did they organize all this? We're not just talking about one project. We are talking about a dozen or more massive construction sites maintained over a millennium, spread across 100 kilometers. This requires more than just a charismatic leader. It requires a system. It requires a shared ideology so powerful that generations of people would dedicate their lives to it. Let's dismantle the old image of the starving hunter-gatherer. The region around Tastepala at the dawn of the Holocene was not a barren wasteland. It was a paradise. The highlands were covered in forests of pistachio and almond trees. The valleys teemed with herds of gazelle, wild sheep, and aurochs. The rivers were full of fish. These people were not struggling for survival. They were living in a world of abundance. This surplus is the key. It gave them the most valuable resource of all: time. Time to think, to dream, to wonder about the cosmos, and crucially, time to build. The construction probably happened in bursts. Picture this: generations fueled by an unprecedented abundance and a profound, shared spiritual vision, dedicating their most precious resource, time, not to survival, but to monumental acts of creation. This utterly redefines our understanding of early human societies. These were not primitive hunter-gatherers, but sophisticated architects of belief, carving their reverence for cosmic cycles and regeneration directly into the Earth's bedrock. What fundamental truths, what deep understandings of existence did they enshrine in these colossal structures, millennia before the first cities? This forgotten legacy forces us to confront the true origins of human complexity. Their story reminds us that our ancestors were dreaming, building, and reaching for the stars in ways we are only now truly beginning to comprehend. What ancient wisdom, what profound connections do you think we have lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always find those conversations truly fascinating.